Story 1. I was outside playing with friends one afternoon. We were around 9 or 10. We lived in a quiet area. As we were playing, we noticed a man in a truck drive by over and over again. Each time he passed my friend's yard, he would drive slowly. We then realized that this man was secretly recording us with one of those old handheld recorders. It freaked us out. We ran inside their house and called his mom. She told them they needed to stay inside and that I should go home. I tried explaining that my mom wasn't home at the moment, but she still made me leave. I lived about a mile or two down the road. I've never run so fast in my life. I was terrified that man was going to find me as I was running back home. When my mom found out what happened, she was super angry that my friend's mom hadn't allowed me to stay at their house until she could come pick me up. Story 2. I was around 11 years old, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a man straddled on top of me with his hand over my mouth and nose. He told me to roll over and not scream. I rolled onto the floor and tried to scream bloody murder. I say tried because when you are truly terrified, it can take a second to find your voice. My mom heard me screaming and came in and fought with the guy. He was at least 6 feet. She was 5'3", and scared him enough with the fighting and screaming that he took off out the window he had come in through. They never did catch him. Story 3. When I was a kid and lived in my old apartment, my mom befriended the downstairs neighbor and would often invite her over for coffee and tea because she was always so lonely. A few weeks went by without hearing from her, so we both went downstairs and knocked on the door. It was like a movie, where when you knocked, the door slowly crept open, as if it had been this way for a while. We walked inside and found her in the bathtub, covered in blood, and the smell was disgusting. Apparently, the lady's girlfriend left her, and she couldn't handle the pain. My mom's way of comforting me was, "Don't worry, Mark. She was our friend, so she won't haunt us." Gee, thanks, Mom. Story 4. Went to my aunt and uncle's house on a family vacation about 10 years ago. We drove from South Texas to some small town in Missouri. Can't remember the name. We arrived there at 1 a.m. The family consisted of myself, 2 younger sisters, my mother, father. Most of the family was hungry from the long drive and wanted to see if a McDonald's was open. I was tired from the long car ride and wanted to stay at the house. Mom said one of my sisters would be staying as well. I settled down into the living room watching TV, slightly dozing off. I can remember hearing pitter-patter down the hallway and assumed my sister was just running around. She'd been eating sugary snacks the whole way up. I get a call from my mom asking what I wanted to eat, and in the background can hear both my sisters arguing. I hear a giggle somewhat behind me, stand straight up and look around. Nothing. I asked my mom if my sister ended up going with them, which she confirmed. I stood in the corner of the room till everyone got back. Story 5. In 3rd grade, I had this strange short teacher named Mrs. Todd. She was always super nice to me in class. She'd always call on me to do the fun activities first, compliment me whenever I did something, and was generally just very positive toward me. At the time, I thought she was perhaps my favorite person in the world. I remember even telling my mother about how much I loved Mrs. Todd. Anyway, one day, I sat down at my desk and opened it up to put stuff in it. When shockingly, I saw that there was a Victoria's Secret magazine sitting in the pull-out drawer. The kid sitting next to me noticed how shocked I was. I thought I was going to get in trouble. And we started talking about how it might have got there. Almost immediately, Mrs. Todd walks up and asks, "What have you got there?" I was seriously confused and told her it was sitting in my desk when I got here this morning. Well, she looks at me and tells me that the kid sitting next to me must have put it there. She kept repeating that statement over and over again to both him and me, until I finally admitted that I guess he could have put it there. Maybe a few days after that, she approached me after class to tell me about this special field trip I could go on if I kept doing good in class. It would be a trip with just her and me to the Gulf of Mexico for the weekend. I remember being really excited about it at the time. However, suddenly she got replaced at the school, and we got this new teacher who didn't like me as much. I was so heartbroken at the time. It wasn't until many years later that I realized how messed up that situation was. It scares me thinking about it still. Story 6. When I was a teenager, I was home alone one weekend, and I was sleeping in my parents' room since there was a TV in there. Sometime around 2 a.m., I felt like I was being stared at from the direction of the hallway. I looked up, and I saw a shadow person looking at me. It was weird, because it was a pure, man-shaped black mass, and I could see him in the dark hallway. I'm guessing light from the TV helped. I sat up and stared back, but I was terrified. We looked at each other for probably 5 seconds, and then it turned and walked down the hall. A few seconds later, I heard a loud crash. I was so scared, I turned the TV to the Disney Channel and stayed awake for as long as possible. When I woke up the next morning, I walked down the hall to the bathroom, and that's when I noticed a mirror that was hanging and fallen off the wall and was shattered. My family still doesn't believe me, but I know what happened. Story 7. When I was about 8 years old, during recess at school, I noticed a bunch of other kids outside a storage room yelling and warning to others not to approach the door because there was an eyeball staring back at you. I was curious because I didn't understand what they meant, but I could see their fear was real because their faces were pale white as they would try to deter me from taking a peek through the keyhole. I remember bending down slightly so I could get a closer look inside, and sure enough, there was an eyeball staring back at me, and it freaked me out so much I peed my pants on the spot. It was only later in the day, after I had ended up at the nurse's office because of the commotion we kids had created, that a janitor had to go into the room to inspect what this whole mess was about. Turns out that someone had placed a mirror against that door, and the eyeball we were seeing was our own reflection. Story 8. When I was 7 years old, I was walking to my babysitter's house all by myself. She only lived a block from the schoolyard. I'd done it all the time. This car pulls up beside me on the road, and the driver keeps gesturing to me to come closer and shouting, "Come here! Come here!" I'm frozen on the sidewalk and shaking my head no, while my knuckles turn white, clinging to my backpack. All he says before driving off is, "Stay away from Christina." And then I never saw him again. Christina was one of my on-again, off-again friends in grade school, along with another girl who alternated between hating me and being buddy-buddy. I had completely forgotten about it after a while and went on being on again, off again with both of them. In 5th grade, the other girl invited me to the pop machine in the back hall at lunch. Cool, okay. Quality time with a girl I've known since I was a baby. Sure. We got back to the classroom, and Christina told me that people were playing with my lunch and hiding my stuff. But she was nice enough to bring it back for me. I started drinking the pop I'd brought for lunch, and something was really off. I spit it out and ran for the water fountain to rinse my mouth out. Turns out, Christina and her sister had topped up my drink with Lysol. If I drank much more, I probably would have been stupidly sick. The police were called, and a restraining order was put on both of them. It was delightfully ineffective, however, because the school was so small, there was no separate class to put them in. They got 3- and 4-day suspensions. I have no idea if the two events are related, who that man was, or how he knew how bad Christina was at the time. But that memory sticks with me to this day. Story 9. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, my twin brother and I would help our friend do his paper route. One summer, we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later, when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack, and his cats were eating him. Story 10. I grew up in a funeral home. I helped out in the office. When I was about 15, we got a call from a man whose wife and infant baby had been murdered in cold blood. There were very few clues. It made headlines. Cops set up surveillance at the viewing. It was heartbreaking, as the mother was holding the baby in her arms. I was asked to take the flower cards and periodically get the husband and ask if he recognized the names. I then photocopied them and put them back. I did it because I was a kid. People knew me, and I was unobtrusive. I talked to the husband quite a bit. He seemed devastated and shaken. The cops told me they had an eyewitness to someone leaving the house the day of the murder. The witness was a 3-year-old girl. She recognized the man leaving. It was the husband's best friend. Turns out that the friend and the husband had made a pact to kill each other's families and run off with their secretaries. The little girl identified the friend, and I guess one of them cracked. They both went to jail on multiple counts, all on the testimony of a 3-year-old. I still cannot believe to this day that that man stood right beside me multiple times, and I had no clue. I don't think I ever looked at life the same way after that. Story 11. When I was like 4, my mom, brother, and I went along with my dad on a business trip to Seattle. I have a distinct memory of being in, like, a Taco Bell or McDonald's. I can't remember which. But I remember waiting in line, getting in the front, then my mom just taking us and leaving. I remember being so disappointed, and my brother and I whined and complained till we got to the next place. Well, a couple of years ago, I'm 28 now, it somehow came up in conversation, and my mom told us the whole story. We got to the front of the line, and the cashier said, "Those men over there are robbing us. They have guns. Take your children and leave now." So my mom did exactly that and never told us what happened. Story 12. My brother and I were in the garage. I was very young, maybe 3 or 4. He was 2 years older than me. He was practicing swinging this bat around. I walked behind him because kids are freaking stupid, and naturally, he hit me with the bat on the backswing. Blood was coming out of my nose, and I was just starting to wail. I could see my brother through the tears, the look of panic on his face. At this point, though, it was still just a terrible accident, and it should have been chalked up to that. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is that my brother, now facing me, clutching the bat with both hands, still a look of panic on his face, as he was trying to get me to stop screaming. He realized there was no consoling me, so he took the bat with both hands, and he hit me across the face with it. Again. Before he ran out of the garage without looking back. Years later, my brother was facing an assault with a deadly weapon charge that he was swearing up and down to all of us that he was not guilty of. It was all a terrible mistake. That memory came back to me. That moment when we were kids, when he had that bat in the garage, when he accidentally hit me across the face the first time, but that second time, that was no accident. He was trying to silence me, for good. All I was to him, at that moment, was a problem. He'd rather me be dead and silent than alive and tattling on him. I didn't testify against him, but I wouldn't be a character witness for him either. He's out of prison now. We don't talk much. Story 13. When I was in grade school, I walked from my house to school every day about a mile. On my walk was a homeless dude that I would always stop to give my vegetables to, so my mom would think I ate them. One day, a friend from my class pulled over with her mother. Her mother offered to drive me to the school with my friend. I told her no. I had to give that dude my veggies, or my mom would get mad if I didn't eat them. Also, I know now, I could have just tossed them, but I'm a dumb kid. So her mother gets really pushy and is insisting I get in the car, but I just continue on my way. That was the last time I saw that friend. I was little, and we weren't super crazy close or anything, so I didn't think anything of it. Later in life, I thought about her and asked my mom if she remembered the girl. Turns out her estranged drug addict mom kidnapped her, and no one was able to find either of them. We lived close to the Mexico border, so they think she left the US. My mom freaked out when I told her the story, and was also kinda mad. I used to give my veggies to a homeless dude. Story 14. When I was about 5, I used to have the hardest time falling asleep. I would drift off, only to quickly wake up screaming that the boom boom monster was going to get me. In my mind, it was a Godzilla-like creature slowly moving toward me, then picking up the pace as it got closer. Well, waking up an hour after bedtime screaming didn't sit right with Dad. So, he sat in my bedroom one night while I fell asleep and figured out that it was because I held the pillow so tight to my head that I could hear my own heartbeat. The monster getting closer was me scaring the shit out of myself. Once I knew that, the boom boom monster was no more. Story 15. When I was around 11 years old, I was at home babysitting my younger cousins while my mom went to the grocery store. We lived in a basement apartment. The basement only had 2 apartments that were right across from each other. On the side of our apartment was the laundry room. The laundry room was fairly large, and that's where most people who had bikes would chain them. I was watching television with my younger cousins when I heard a knock on the door. This was super weird to me already, because literally no one ever visited us out of nowhere, and my mother had her own key. I was still super short, so I had to get a small chair to stand on so I could look through the peephole. I looked through the peephole, and there was some giant dude I had never seen before. I remember saying, "Hi," and then saying, "Can I help you?" The door was still definitely locked, though. This man proceeded to tell me that his bike was stolen from the laundry room. He didn't continue talking, though, so I said, I'm sorry." He proceeds to repeat himself, but then adds that he knows what his bike smells like. I remember being so fucking confused and could not imagine where he was going with this. I said, "I'm sorry your bike got stolen." Then he said that because he knew what his bike smelled like, I had to open the door so he could smell my hands. Smell my freaking hands. I got so freaked out that I almost started crying and kept saying, "I'm sorry, but I didn't steal your bike." He started getting super aggressive and pounding on the door and saying that he needed to smell my hands so he could make sure that I didn't steal his bike. I then got off the chair and just started screaming "Mom" over and over again as if she was home. This is interesting because I speak a different language and would never call my mother Mom. I did this throughout the apartment as if I was going to get her. And when I checked afterwards, he was gone. Still, one of the creepiest things I've ever encountered. I told my mom when she got home, and she flipped out. Never saw that dude again. Story 16. When I was around 8 years old, I was playing over at a friend's house. This blue car drove around the block, then circled around and pulled up across the street from us. The man driving was just sitting there. The window was rolled up, but we could tell he was looking at us. After a minute or two, he got out of his car and walked right up to my friend and me. He said there was an emergency with my mom and told me to hurry and go with him. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me to the car. He had this creepy smile, like a look of immense satisfaction. My friend, Mindy, started yelling at him to let me go. She then threw a rock at him, missed, and broke his car window instead. The man looked furious and started to walk towards her, dragging me along as he did so. I decided that was a good time to hit him in his beanbag as hard as I could. I didn't hit him quite right, maybe not low enough because he didn't act hurt at all, but it was enough to make him flinch. I jerked my hand out of his and ran back to Mindy, and we bolted into her house. She told her dad what happened and called the cops. He got his gun and went outside to confront the guy, but he was gone. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. It always creeps me out to think of the things he was planning on doing to me. Story 17. My mom and aunt have an interesting story with an old haunt. They grew up in the hollers in eastern Kentucky. One night, when they were 7 or 8 years old, they were sleeping in their grandma's house when my aunt awoke to someone whispering her name from the end of the bed. She said it sounded so terrifying that she was afraid to look, but it kept doing it. She shook my mom enough to wake her up, and my mom, too, heard it calling my aunt's name. They had the blankets over their head, and my mom finally got the courage to look down to the end of the bed. She said there were 2 male figures, bloody, slightly decaying, and looking like they had been in a car accident. The figures stood at the end of their bed all night, whispering their name, while my mom and aunt hid under the blankets. The figures eventually vanished before dawn. My mom and aunt swear the truth to this story today. I've asked them to tell me it many times over the years, and it never changes. My aunt hates talking about it because she thinks it could invite them in. Anyway, when they told my grandpa about it that next morning, he said that he knew several people who had similar experiences, and that those figures were called Bloody Bones and Rawhead in that area. A simple Google search will tell you that these figures existed in Southern folklore. Story 18. When I was around 9, my mom had bought this giant red Chinese cabinet online and was having it delivered to our house. The lady who is delivering it comes by along with some old man. The lady, the old man, and my mom are all sitting in the living room talking about who knows what. I end up walking downstairs to get something to eat and see them all. I go to say hi and am greeted by the women and the old guy. After that, I get my food and go back upstairs. Eventually, after they leave, I go and talk to my mom and ask who the people were. She says that the lady was there to deliver the giant red cabinet. I then ask who the old guy was, and my mom goes dead quiet. She says there wasn't any old guy, to which I say there most certainly was. And we get into a small argument with me, swearing on my life that someone else was there. My mom called the lady again, and she ended up sending some pictures of her deceased grandpa after I described what he looked like. It was a total match. To this day, I know I saw someone with her, but it still creeps me out a bit when I found out exactly who it was that I saw. Story 19. When I was about 7, I was at home with my brothers, and the babysitter was watching us. My mom was really into antiques at the time. She had this antique chest. It was quite big. I was always weary of it. It just gave me the creeps. I pleaded with my mom to get rid of it. I'd have nightmares about this chest. So I was in the living room and heard the sound of the lid creaking open. Immediately, this puts me on high alert and piques my curiosity. I look over to the chest and see the lid opening. What I see next, I will never forget. I see this white, pale hand slipping out of the chest. It was opening, and a pale white hand was emerging. I screamed. I started crying. The babysitter said it was my brother playing tricks on me. He was in the other room, though. The chest was packed full of our childhood artwork and old documents and paper. There was no room for my brother to hide inside. Story 20. I woke up one night when I was 12 because I dreamt that my older brother got into a car accident. I got out of bed and wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get something to drink. My mother was sitting there and asking me why I was awake. I told her I had a bad dream and need something to drink. I got a glass of water when it rang at our door. My mother went to see who was there in the middle of the night. 2 police officers asked if they could come inside for a moment. I couldn't hear what they were talking about because I was still in the kitchen and they were in the hallway. After the 2 officers left, my mother came back to the kitchen completely pale and told me that I should go to bed now. I asked her what was wrong when she informed me that my brother was in a car accident and she needed to wake up my dad and go to the hospital. When I pointed out that this was the bad dream I had before waking up, she only looked at me for a couple of seconds. I prepared myself for comments like, "Don't be silly and go to bed now." But instead, she said, "Me too." So basically, we both had the same freaking dream of my brother having a car accident. and we both woke up minutes before the police came over to tell us it really happened. My brother survived with some minor injuries, and we've seen the photos of the accident in the newspaper the next day. It looked 100% like in my dream, to the smallest detail. The way he lost control over the car, where it flipped the first time, and the tree it came to a stop. Even today, my mother and I talk about this. Nobody else believes us when we tell the story. Story 21. At my parents' house, I used to hear my mom calling out to me when she didn't, and she confirmed she'd hear me call out to her when I didn't. That was a common occurrence. Also, whenever I'd be alone for a little while, if my mom was late from work or at the grocery store, I'd usually be in the main living room, playing N64. I would oftentimes hear loud banging sounds from upstairs, as if a heavy piece of furniture tipped over. I'd go check, and nothing was out of place. Both my mother and grandmother have confirmed similar experiences when they're alone in the house. There was also the time I was downstairs on my laptop. Everyone else was in bed. It was after midnight, and I didn't realize just how dark everything had gotten without the lights on. I'm zoned out when I begin to hear what sounds like a murmuring from behind me, like the low rumble you'd hear at a gathering when people are talking, and you can't make out the conversation. The hairs on my neck immediately stood up, and my body locked up from fear. Tears ran down my face from the physical reaction my body was having. I refused to acknowledge it and kept staring at my laptop screen in silence. It took forever for my body to go back to normal. Sometime later, I told my mother what happened, and it freaked her out because she said she's heard the murmuring as well. I've always hated that house. Those are some of the creepiest and most disturbing childhood true stories. Scary stuff. Let me know if you like these true stories, and I will make more of them.